Hey everyone, ready to dive into something that might make you rethink your financial advisor? We're getting into a question that hits close to home for many, I think. Do women get the short end of the stick when it comes to financial advice? You sent us some interesting research from the Journal of Finance, a paper by Bhattacharya and their team, and well, let me tell you, it's got some eyebrow-raising findings in it.
This study really stands out because it doesn't just crunch numbers. It goes undercover. We're talking auditors sent into actual financial advisory firms in Hong Kong to see what kind of advice men versus women actually get in the real world.
Undercover auditors. Okay, now you've got me hooked. This is sounding like a financial thriller.
Yeah.
So how did they actually pull this off?
So they wanted to be really, really sure that any differences in the advice given weren't because of things that they couldn't directly observe, Like, for example, women on average might have different risk tolerances or like investment goals coming in. So they created what they called, and this is kind of a fun term, avatars for these auditors to step into.
Avatars like in those metaverse things. Now I'm picturing financial advisors with like VR headsets.
Not quite.
Sure.
Not quite. In this context, think of it as each auditor being assigned a specific persona, a character to play. Some avatars were high risk takers, some were cautious, some were dead set on international investments. You get the idea.
Right.
And here's the important part. They had both male and female auditors playing each of these roles.
So if a woman playing a daredevil investor gets different advice than a man playing the same role, that's pointing to something else going on, right?
Exactly.
But I've got to ask, why Hong Kong for this undercover operation?
Now, that's a question I had too, and the paper actually addresses it head on. Turns out Hong Kong has a much higher proportion of female investors compared to a lot of other places, making it a more relevant sample for this question. Plus, within Hong Kong, they've got these two main types of financial advisors: securities firms, the ones usually associated with like stock trading, and then you've got financial planning firms who take a broader approach.
Okay.
This setup gave the researchers even more to compare.
So we've got our undercover agents, these diverse personas they're taking on, two types of advisors. What did they uncover? Were women being steered towards, say, investments that historically underperform, or something that blatant?
It's a bit more nuanced than that, which is why this research is so fascinating. They found that, on average, financial advice in Hong Kong wasn't exactly stellar to begin with.
Okay.
They used the term suboptimal to describe advice that lacked diversification.
Yeah.
The classic don't put all your eggs in one basket issue. Or was home biased, meaning the advisor mostly stuck to recommending investments based in Hong Kong.
So even before factoring in gender, a lot of this advice was missing the mark on some pretty fundamental investment principles.
Exactly. But here's where the gender piece comes into play. While both types of firms dished out their fair share of this suboptimal advice, financial planning firms were significantly more likely to give it to women. Securities firms, on the other hand, didn't show as much of a difference between genders.
Now hold on a minute. You're saying the firms that are supposed to be giving more holistic, personalized advice, the financial planners, were actually worse for women. That's pretty shocking, isn't it? Were they purposely trying to put women at a disadvantage? What's the deal here?
That's where this research gets really, really intriguing. It's less about intentional sabotage and more about unconscious bias creeping in. Remember those avatars we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, the study found that financial planning firms were way more likely to just go with an avatar's stated preferences when that avatar was played by a woman.
So if a woman said she was really, really risk averse, they would bend over backward to find something super safe, even if it wasn't the smartest investment strategy overall.
Precisely.
Oh.
And if a man expressed that same level of caution, the advisors weren't as likely to go to that extreme. Their findings suggest that this could be linked to assumptions some advisors might hold about women's financial knowledge.
It makes me think, a while back I was actually talking to a financial advisor, and they kept explaining things in such basic terms. Even when I would ask like more in-depth questions about certain investment strategies, it's like they had this preconceived notion that I wouldn't understand. So are they basically saying advisors just assume women don't know much about investing?
Well, it's not quite as straightforward as that. Their model suggests this behavior might be driven by assumptions about like average financial literacy levels, right? And it's super important to remember here that we're talking about statistical patterns here, not judgments about any individual woman's knowledge,
right,
or anyone listening, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So less about outright malice and more about, misguided attempts to be helpful. Like, they think they're doing women a favor by being extra careful with their money or something?
Exactly. The researchers actually call this statistical discrimination. It's not about blatant sexism. It's about relying on these broad stereotypes, in this case, that women on average might be less financially literate to guide their advice. It's like they're using a broad brush when what's needed is a finer approach.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. It's not necessarily coming from a bad place, but the impact is still significant, right?
Yeah.
Like, women could be missing out on opportunities just because of these assumptions.
Right, and that's why this research is so crucial. It highlights the importance of awareness, both for advisors and investors.
Speaking of awareness, the paper also delves into this really fascinating model.
Yeah.
Something about how people choose which type of advisor to work with in the first place.
Right. So they wanted to understand if this self-selection, whether someone gravitates towards a securities firm versus a financial planner, could be playing a role in these findings. So they proposed that folks with a moderate level of financial knowledge, right, might be more likely to opt for those securities firms because they're comfortable handling some of the trading aspects themselves.
Okay.
Whereas, those with lower financial knowledge might naturally lean towards financial planners for more comprehensive guidance. Makes sense, right?
So if there's this statistical trend of women having lower financial literacy, does that then make them more likely to end up at these financial planning firms where they might encounter this biased advice? It's like a double-edged sword in a way.
That's precisely what their model suggests. It's like this double whammy. Women are statistically more likely to be less financially savvy and more likely to seek out the type of advisor who might be more susceptible to these unconscious biases.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. It makes you wonder, what can we do about this? Should we all become like financial experts overnight to avoid these potential pitfalls? I mean, I'm all for learning, but that seems like a pretty tall order.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, becoming like a financial whiz is certainly one way to go. But let's be real, we can't all be experts on everything, right?
Sure.
And plus, that's kind of why we consult advisors in the first place.
Right.
The key takeaway here, I think, is awareness. We need to be aware of these potential biases, both as advisors ourselves, if that's the case, and as investors seeking advice.
So it's not about shying away from seeking financial guidance altogether. It's about being a more informed and empowered consumer, right? What would you say are some practical steps our listeners can take? Should we all just walk into these meetings like armed with a stack of investing textbooks?
Well, I admire the enthusiasm. Maybe leave the book pile at home. Wouldn't want to make anyone nervous. But in all seriousness, knowledge is power in these situations.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask those tough questions. Get those detailed explanations, and crucially, do your own research. There are so many fantastic resources available online these days. You've got financial education websites, even podcasts just like this one that can equip you with the knowledge to make informed decisions.
Yeah, that's such a vital point. We shouldn't be afraid to speak up, clarify things that we don't understand, and even, push back if something just doesn't feel right, especially if we suspect those unconscious biases might be creeping in.
Absolutely. If an advisor seems to be making assumptions about your knowledge or your goals, address it directly. It's your financial well-being at stake, and you have every right to advocate for yourself.
And hey, it never hurts to get a second opinion, right?
Yeah.
Just like you'd shop around for a doctor or a contractor, maybe even talking to a few different financial advisors before making any big decisions is always a good strategy.
Couldn't agree more. And, while this study focused specifically on Hong Kong, it's important to remember that these issues aren't confined by geography. It's safe to say that these biases could be present in financial industries across the globe.
Yeah, that's such a crucial reminder. It's not a them problem. It's something to be mindful of wherever we are in the world. This research really highlights how even fields like finance, which we often think of as so objective, data-driven, can still be influenced by these subtle yet really impactful biases.
Precisely, and I think it underscores the importance of critical thinking and continuous learning, not just for women, but for everyone navigating the world of finance.
This deep dive has been such an eye-opener. It makes you wonder, with the increasing popularity of robo-advisors these days and just the sheer amount of financial information available online, are things actually getting better, or are these biases, perhaps unintentionally getting baked into algorithms or overwhelming us with even more noise? That's something to ponder, right?
It is. It's a question we should all be asking. Do these platforms actually level the playing field, or do they risk perpetuating those existing biases? I think it's a fascinating area for future research for sure. What we do know for sure is that even as technology evolves, being a critical consumer of financial advice, however you're getting it, remains absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. Question everything, do your homework, and don't hesitate to seek out those multiple perspectives. Great advice, not just for managing money, but maybe for navigating life in general. This deep dive has given us all a lot to think about. A huge thank you to you for breaking down this complex research in such a clear and engaging way.
It's been my pleasure. Always happy to dive into these important conversations.
And to you listening, thank you for sending in this really thought-provoking research. Keep those deep dive requests coming. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.